So to reintroduce myself, I'm Isabel Berwick. I host the FT's Working It podcast about working life. And I am delighted to be here on this panel. And we're going to talk about psychology or technology, which can do more to improve productivity. So we're going to have a poll to start with. I'm going to ask you to raise your hands as I'm not going to bother with the iPad. Which can do more? Who thinks psychology is more important in terms of improving productivity? Me. Oh, nobody on the... Oh, Alex is counting, thank you. Can you count me and Tracey, Alex?
18, 19.
Yeah.
19.
19, thank you. And who thinks technology is more important? You're going to raise your hand here, Tomas? No.
6. I abstain.
14.
14, so psychology is slightly ahead at the start of the thing. But let's see if you change your mind during the event. So let me introduce our 4 panelists. Tracey Camilleri is co-author of the new book, The Social Brain, The Psychology of Successful Groups. And she's co-founder of the consultancy Thompson Harrison. That's Tracey.
Great.
Tomas Chamorro Premuzic is a psychologist and entrepreneur. And his new book is I, Human, AI, Automation, and the Quest to Reclaim What Makes Us Unique. He's also the author of one of the articles that has been most popular ever in the history of the Financial Times, and it was titled, Why Do So Many Mediocre Men Get Promoted? I think that was the title, wasn't it? Yeah.
Oh my God, I love that article. I send that to everybody.
It went viral in a very big way. Lucy Cooper is Head of Customer Innovation for Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia Pacific at Microsoft. And on the end, I think you've flown in from the States, haven't you, Alex? Alex Pang is Program Manager at 4-Day Week Global, the organization that helps others implement the 4-Day Week. And he's the author of Work Less, Do More, Designing the 4-Day Week. So welcome, everybody, and welcome to everyone who's in the room. Thank you for being with us, not with leadership. So I'm going to start by asking each of the panelists in turn to outline quite succinctly what they would do to solve the productivity problem that's so pernicious. Okay, I'm going to start with you, Tomas, because you're right next to me.
Well, so I think, and the reason why I didn't vote is because, rather than picking one or the other, I think it's managing the interface or the intersection of technology and psychology that is the defining challenge of today. And so, I think there's 3 specific elements that need to be addressed. One is, as per previous technological innovations or disruptive revolutions, technology mostly doesn't eliminate jobs, but changes the constellation of skills that are required to perform those jobs. So, it's appropriate that we are here at an event organized by MindGym, since the focus on learning, reskilling, and upskilling, particularly around soft skills, is very, very important. And if you think about AI, ChatGPT, generative AI, this is the defining kind of element that we need to consider. So invest in reskilling and upskilling. Second one, understand that technology will probably create many new jobs, more so than it destroys, and job creation tends to occur at a faster rate than job elimination. But again, for people to have access to the new jobs, you need to basically reimagine their career potential, and again, understand potential, so assess their potential in a far deeper and more meaningful way than we typically do today. It's focusing less on expertise, hard skills, and more on the skills that will help them have access to the new jobs. And the third one really is we need to help people to not just use, but also ignore technology where relevant. Because if you look at the data on productivity, it's very clear. Between 2000 and 2008, there was a significant increase. After that, with the rise and ubiquity of social media platforms and distractions, actually productivity stagnates. Except, of course, if you measure it properly, which is not the time that people spend supposedly working or the working hours when most of these distractions occur, but the energy or input they put in, right? And I always remember during the first kind of phase of the pandemic when offices shut and people were sent back home, a client of mine, in a sort of cynical way, said, but without the office, how will I pretend to work? It's true that a lot of the time you are at work, there's no point pretending to work when you're at home, but actually we know that the distractions are even higher when it's just you and all of your technological devices in front of you. And by the way, multitasking is a myth. We all do it. About 70-80% of people report distractions due to multitasking. It's estimated that it deducts the equivalent of 10 IQ points from your performance. It's about as debilitating as smoking weed, but not as enjoyable. I assume.
That's an insight I haven't heard before, so thank you.
Yeah.
Tracy, what would you do to solve the productivity challenge?
Yes, well, I voted for psychology, and partly because it takes human psychology to build technology anyway. But and what I've been interested in is the psychology of successful groups, of teams, and that serendipity when a team actually performs as more than the sum of its parts. And we've taken 3 particular lenses, I think all of which connect with productivity. The first is understanding our evolutionary human behavior better than we do, and being able to work with the grain of it, and sometimes against the grain of it. I mean, not everything about being human is positive. I mean, we're homophilic, actually, and that's often not good for productivity. We like people like ourselves. But just thinking, in this room, what's rumbling beneath the surface of all our interactions, and how we can be better at understanding, for example, when we produce social endorphins together, just simply by walking in synchrony or laughing together or eating together. Those things are so important for the creation of trust and also discretionary effort and helping teams to perform. So that's one thing we look at. The second is scale. And we think a lot about numbers, but very rarely think about the size of teams and matching the size of teams to task. And we are fundamentally relational beings. 75% of everything we talk about, whether men or women, we talk about people. And yet, building relationships is heavy cognitive work. And there's a limit to how many relationships we can have, given the size of our brains. So we've really been thinking about scale and the stresses of scaling and how that affects leadership. And lastly, thinking about environment, the social environment. And I think it was the World Health Organization in 1950, when they first defined well-being, it was defined as mental, physical, and social health. And so much investment is sort of focused on mental and physical health, but very little on the social health of the people we work with and of teams and so on. And so I think productivity, by focusing on our social brains, we can increase productivity. So psychology.
Thank you, Tracy. Lucy.
Thanks, hi everyone. It feels quite pressurized doing this because you've all chosen to stay here, so I feel like we have to be extra interesting. So I think at Microsoft we actually, although a lot of what the technology that we delivers brings about productivity gains, and I'll bamboozle you with some statistics later in the presentation about some of the things we found, we like to think of it as focusing less on productivity and focusing more on delivering new, authentic ways of working. And that's because of what we find out in the data. So we've just published a sort of very large-scale report on a new era of work with artificial intelligence, 31,000 people across 31 countries, and billions of sort of Microsoft technology data points that we looked at along the way. And I think a couple of interesting things to pull out here is, firstly, 64% of respondents of that 31,000 said they don't have enough time or energy to get their job done. And actually, if you focus on a region in Asia Pacific, that number went up to 72%. So that's like really quite significant. And actually, 70% of the respondents, despite 49% saying they fear to some extent about AI displacing their jobs, 70% said they would happily devolve tasks to artificial intelligence where they could. And so we think about, how do we use productivity tools to deliver new ways of working? McKinsey have done a report where they talked about, with executives about the number one barrier to digital technologies being adopted is really unsurprisingly culture, and culture, I think, has a lot to do with psychology. And the points, I've written them down because it's not my report. The leaders said that they are unsure about what to do in terms of how they recruit as a result of these digital tools and productivity tools, the career paths that they offer people, and the development opportunities, as well as the workplace environment. And I'm going to pick out the career paths and development opportunities, which I think is really interesting. If you take away tasks, whatever those tasks might be, and give them to productivity tools, you have to think as a leadership really, really hard about how do you make people feel valued and give them a sense of purpose for what makes them unique and special in the workplace. And so if you came up through a company being the person who's brilliant at Excel and can completely manipulate Excel to give you the best business model in 3 hours, and a productivity tool or artificial intelligence can do that, how do you make that person feel valued? How do you tether them back to the company? If you've got the person who just does the best PowerPoint presentations for the board, and that now begins to be supplemented by technology, how do you really deliver a sense of purpose and belonging? And so a lot of what we focus on actually at Microsoft is delivering those tools to customers in an environment where we want people to feel that psychological sense of belonging and help companies evolve with that psychological need to not have people feel untethered, to not have people feel displaced, and to help them evolve their skill sets and grow the size of the pie of what a company can achieve and underpin those kind of conditions for growth. And the report also talked about 5 obstacles to productivity. We can come back to those in more detail, but I'll just give them to you quickly now. Inefficient meetings was number 1. And actually on Teams, if we break down how people use Microsoft tools, we have found across all Microsoft tools they are 57% communications, so that's emails, Teams, and Teams chat, and they're 43% creation, PowerPoint, email, Word, and OneNote. So if you think about inefficient meetings as the number 1 barrier to productivity across those 31,000 people, that is the majority of people still spending time communicating and not enough time creating. So we're really interested in how we can unlock creation. Second is lack of clear goals. Third is too many meetings. Fourth is feeling uninspired. And 5 is not finding the information that I need. And so there's a lot that we can unpack there about how you enable people to be effective through productivity, but I'll stop there. So
thanks, Lucy.
Hand to Alex.
Let's unpack some of that later. I love the meetings part. Alex.
So I think that having studied companies that have been moving to 4-day work weeks, a couple of things that we're seeing are that they teach us that productivity gains are not just things that happen kind of at the desk or sort of at the factory floor, that it's actually worth taking a broader, sort of more holistic view and sort of recognizing that some of the productivity challenges come from from organizational and systemic issues around sort of the unsustainability of careers, burnout and overwork, the cost that has sort of for people and for organizations. Now, the enduring challenges that we have that come from sort of continued sort of challenges around sort of gender and promotion and inequity, or just the amount of energy and friction it takes to knit together work life, home, care, etc. One of the things, and not to sound like one of those internet ads, the one quick trick that does everything, but one of the remarkable things about the 4-day week is that it offers a very sort of clear, sharp way of solving a whole bunch of these problems simultaneously. It provides a structure for making work and careers sort of in companies more efficient and sustainable. It also, in a subtler way, kind of revises or changes the way that people and leaders think about the relationship between time and productivity sort of in work in ways that I think end up producing kind of more equitable kinds of workplaces. It also, of course, just gives everyone more time, which I think nobody is going to see as a bad thing. And it does it at scale for everybody in an organization, from the CEO down to the newest hire. And so I think that and finally, we see in companies sort of stories that are putting into practice all of the things that Tomas and Tracey and Lucy are talking about, right? Sort of more thoughtful ways of implementing automation or using artificial intelligence, sort of incentives to collaborate and communicate much better, and indeed to see collaboration as sort of and to see the problems that we all face as essentially social and organizational ones. And I think sort of also, seeing the redesign of work as a way of investing it with a greater degree of purpose and meaning, as well as sort of along the way making meetings shorter and sort of doing a bunch of other things to make work on a day-to-day basis better. So.
Perfect. Out of interest, is there anyone here who took part in the 4-day workweek experiment in the UK? Not in the audience.
There's time yet. We'll get to you.
Alex will get to you by the end of this session. So, Lucy, you touched there on some of the things that made people less productive. Could you talk about some of the, just ways that would be useful for the audience in which we can harness tech for our productivity?
So I'll talk about, I'm going to try not to be a Microsoft ad, but I will talk about a couple of things that I think are really interesting that my team does. So I don't work in HR. I help all of the biggest companies in the world innovate on top of technology platforms. They don't have to be Microsoft. Obviously, we prefer if they are. And so I think about this question, which is how do you get the most that helps your companies innovate and grow at scale in really profound areas. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples actually talking about Teams and Power Apps, because I think that's something that everybody can kind of get their head around. Like, when we went into the pandemic in March 2020, Teams had 32 million daily users. 11 months later, in February 2021, it had 145 million. Teams actually saves the average person 4 hours a week. But I'm going to talk to you about two specific examples. The first one is a healthcare company where they use Teams together with really basic Power Apps, which is basically build your own app in a corporate environment using your company's data on a really simple interface. And what they did is they put those two technologies together so that doctors and nurses could collaborate in real time on a patient level treatment decision. And so they did a few things. They created a bot that pinged a doctor when a patient's test results were ready, instead of a doctor having to chase for test results or not knowing that test results were potentially waiting there to be collected for hours or sometimes even days, so that they could immediately look at those results, share those results across the entirety of the team that was working with that patient, and make better decisions about patients quicker. These were patients that are sort of in hospital, they're sort of inpatients. The second one is they used Power Apps to build apps from Teams so that they could track patient care plans that were being created when the doctors and nurses were walking around doing their wards, talking to the the patients. So instead of them talking, writing down notes, giving them to the nurse, being put in a stack of notes, having to be put in by an admin assistant in the hospital, they have a tablet and they're putting those in real time. Those are immediately shared with the entire team that needs to see those to help patient outcomes and treatments. And doctors were self-reporting that they saved 90 minutes a day on the tasks that they were previously doing, and the nurses too, which they could then spend on the patient bedside or, treating patients. And I think that's really, that's a really easy way to talk to you about, what can you do with this kind of technology? I think the second one is in more heavy manufacturing or telco environments, and this is where we've seen such a huge uplift, is bringing together the Teams environment, again with we call them low-code, no-code apps, and that again is putting the power of the decision-making into the hands of the people who are experts. And so that's basically saying, you maybe run an oil refinery or you run a car factory, so you're dealing with thousands of people at a time, all skill sets, all expertise, and it's quite an unsafe environment. And the same with telco. You could have engineers, 50 feet off the air. We've been trialing this with a new energy company that makes wind farms, and so you've got engineers at the top of these wind turbines. I actually did a live call with one of them. It's terrifying what they can see. I mean, it's like being in a glider, like a little hang glider, and they're stuck out the top with their head. It's extraordinary what they're doing up there. But what we have done is created all kinds of apps and technologies for these people to pull the data that they need from the systems. It's their data, and it creates the reports that they need to do in order to run this kind of operation better. And so, to give you an example, this is being able to things like measure temperature, water pressure, other types of like hydrogen or CO2 pressure that's going on inside, huge long pipelines or unsafe environments inside a factory floor. You're not relying on asking someone a question, having them go to the front line, come back to you with the answer and tell you something before you make a decision, or decide that something might not be potentially as safe as you would want it to be, and having to sort of, filter up and filter down. We're putting technology, not in IT, in the hands of the people that run these factories, so that they can see at any given time what is going on and decisions that need to be made. And actually, one of the most amazing side effects that we've seen, it's often the intended objective, but not always, is carbon emissions. So by being able to do this, they're being able to optimize when packing lines are on, when they're off, how they may need actually 5% less water in order to deliver something. And we're saving anywhere between 15 to 25% carbon emissions on a single packing line in a factory. So you think about what that adds up to in an industrial environment. And technology is really, really helping to drive these net zero goals in real time. Given the fact that most companies are behind in their net zero commitments, this is an area where I think it's a different lens on productivity, but massively unlocking productivity. And so that's just, I'm hoping, 2 really real world examples of the kinds of things that technology can do. I'll land by saying, again, I won't go into this in much detail, what we do find, especially in these more industrial environments, is the number one cause of the technology not being adopted is psychology. So people fear they're going to lose their job, especially the blue-collar workers, and they don't want to adopt the technology. And so then there's a whole conversation that we can get into these brilliant experts of how do you help them along on that journey? How do you help them understand it's not about a job being taken away, it's about tools being given and potentially more opportunities for development, or definitely more opportunities for development being opened up in someone's career path.
So actually, with that last point, I'm going to bring Tracey in here. How would you use psychology to help people overcome a fear of technology?
Well, fear, all the magic that you talk about, I've been interested in the fact that actually people do need to come together in person. And, the kind of, when you're fearful, it's very difficult to take on new learning. It's very difficult. And I think, what I think we've got to be better at understanding is actually giving people time to take on these things. And also, it's not just psychology and technology, it's also philosophy that we need to think about in terms of productivity. What are we trying to do here? What's important for us as people? How can we put people first? As you talk about, these things are tools for us rather than, taking away our livelihood. So I think it probably, everything's in such a rush in a way. I think we need to create containers for really thinking about, as you say, Lucy, how are we going to develop people in different ways? And there is also a legitimacy to some people's fear about technology. There's an absolute legitimacy. People may be losing their jobs and their livelihoods. So I think the brilliant thing about having you guys in the room is that you have agency here to think about what your philosophy is, and where technology is absolute magic, and where also the unique human gifts that we have for creativity, for imagination, for working together in groups, how you can actually create environments where that happens as well. So it's fabulous to have you guys here as an audience.
Thanks. And Tomas, you're the AI guy, but it's moving so fast. Tracey's asking for time. What are the risks and downsides, and how can we counter those?
Yeah, I think it moves fast, but we often overestimate the impact in the short term, I think. And I think there's certain, the advantage is human nature or psychology doesn't change. We are exactly the same, 100% genetically identical to our ancestors that are 200,000 years old, right? So that's a given. So in a way, technology, you can always count on it to evolve and become commoditized, but how we interact with it is the ongoing challenge. And I think, nobody knows what future jobs will be like. People make a lot of predictions. Nobody has data on the future. It's advisable to make predictions that are at least 50 years away from now, so nobody cares about checking, and everybody will be dead by then. But I think what you can count on is that if you have somebody who is able to manage themselves and others, who deploys their curiosity, who has a desire to learn, and who is more driven, you can bet that with some assistance and guidance, these people will adjust. And of course, the risks that we have been mentioning and the fears about AI or whatever the next technology is are partly and largely, I think, legitimate. I think if you don't worry, you should. So I'd rather people have some concerns, experiment, and understand that they need to be thinking about reinventing themselves and harnessing the skills that machines will likely not develop, right? So if you're an Uber driver, it's great that you can take passengers from A to B without actually knowing about the streets of London. And what we thought until recently was a unique selling point or a differentiator of black cab drivers, knowing everything by heart, no longer is. Soon you might not need human drivers, or people might pay a premium fee to have a humans if they like the conversation and they feel lonely or they want music. And this metaphor can be applied and should be applied to basically every single job. So I think we should be thinking about how we will add value, and now the disruption is coming at the level of skilled jobs. And fundamentally, I think we should see two big real opportunities. Opportunities not in the HR sense of the euphemism for weaknesses, but actual opportunities, which is number one, and I know Microsoft talks, Satya Nadella talks about this a lot, the opportunity to actually decrease skills-based inequality when people have access to technology that make them better. And there's a study that is about to be published by MIT researchers that actually shows what you would expect, right? You have a group of relatively unskilled people using generative AI for a series of tasks, competing with experts that don't have access to this tool, and actually the performance differences between the two groups are negligent.
Wow.
And I think, which you would expect, right? And I think the second one is that there is a great opportunity for tech, including AI, to sterilize or sanitize a great deal of the nepotism and bias that exists in the workplace, starting with performance measures, metrics, or appraisals. Performance measures in every organization are still, by and large, a popularity context. If you suck up to your boss, you get a high rating. In a world where we can actually quantify the value that people add at all levels, this goes away, which is, I think, why there is so much backlash and resistance against AI, because it has the potential to de-bias organizations. Of course, it also has the potential to exacerbate human biases, but often when we look at AI and we are horrified by stories of algorithms breaking bad or gone rogue, it's actually their ability to expose human biases that we should be ashamed of. So that's the opportunity, I think, and that's why I'm excited.
Thank you. Alex, I wanted to bring you in here because I think you're the kind of tech-human mashup on the end of the.
A hybrid.
What is the potential? Where do you see the future of work in 5 years' time? Is the 4-day week going to catch on as a productivity and well-being measure?
Well, I think it already is catching on. As William Gibson put it, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. But I think to speak to a couple of these issues, the great American philosopher Bart Simpson said, to those who say there are no easy answers, I say, you're not looking hard enough. The way to create psychological safety around new technologies, to get people to experiment with them, to sort of use them in ways, to deploy them in workplaces in ways that enhance workers rather than eliminate them, is to give workers power over how these are introduced into the workplace and used. So, in the companies that I've been working with, basically executive groups, folks like you, do the kind of high-level strategic stuff around what the 4-day week what a successful 4-day week is going to look like, how we're going to measure it, how long it'll last, sort of how we communicate it internally and externally. The work actually of figuring out how to make that happen on the ground is devolved down to teams and individuals. For a couple reasons. One, no CEO, and certainly no outside consultant from Silicon Valley, knows everyone's job well enough to redesign it sort of kind of on them. Second, most of us, if we have some experience at our jobs, have both a combination of kind of professional and technical skill, but we also kind of know what's stupid about the way that work happens now, and we have a sense of how we could fix that, right? We just don't have very many opportunities. The 4-day week offers is the chance to put a bunch of that stuff into practice. Technology plays a big role in enabling 4-day weeks in a couple ways. One is just kind of process improvements. It can lay the kind of groundwork for creating more time that can then be handed back or shared back to, with everyone. One of the reasons the pandemic did not kill off the 4-day week movement was that a lot of companies learned how to use collaboration tools and communication tools in ways that actually made everyone more productive at a time when we desperately needed more time to homeschool and deal with the uncertainties of a thing that was killing a lot of people. But it's also the case that when you give people the power to redesign their work and to use technology to do so, people turn out not to make themselves redundant. What they do with the technology instead is use it to automate the boring parts of their job, number one. Also the parts that can actually be automated versus the ones that look to outsiders like, this is simple stuff that we can just eliminate. Like, if you were visiting your doctor, you could, in a way, kind of automate this sort of chit-chat and kind of getting to know you stuff. That would be a really bad idea for all kinds of reasons, but to an outsider it might look smart. Furthermore, they use the technology to, but also to augment their ability to do the work that matters most to them, that delivers the highest value. And so I think that that they actually offer a really nice model for thinking about how we can introduce these technologies in ways that empower workers, that that make work better, and that create more jobs rather than rather than eliminating them.
And can I just this is a very beautiful implication of what Alex was saying, which is that we should all be trying to make our jobs less predictable. And that's a really good metaphor for being more creative. If the more routine you fall into, the more at risk you are of having a machine doing a job. But that's a good excuse for actually injecting a little bit of unpredictability, serendipity, and improvisation into your work.
Improvisation, exactly. It's not the unpredictability that comes from driving down a road with the lights off.
Yes.
It's the unpredictability that comes from jazz.
Yeah.
Right? Or playing off other people, that sort of thing.
Right, so we've started a bit late, so I'm coming to questions a bit late, and I'm also not going to bother with the app as we're quite a small group. So if you'd like to ask a question, put your hand up, and I think there's a mic. There is a mic. Right, here in the middle.
I like the anti-technology bias.
Yes, sorry.
No apps.
Sorry.
Psychology 1.
Hi, could you say who you are?
Yes, thank you. I'm Irina Angel, I'm from Bloomberg News. My question would be around measuring productivity for remote workers. So one of the big issues around remote and hybrid working is how hard, or the lack of a consensus around how to measure productivity. And what tech tools can we use, and it would be great if you could give me some examples to measure productivity for people working at home, and what degree of surveillance is acceptable?
Ooh,
thank you.
Spyware. Who wants to take that?
I'm happy to.
Thomas, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question, and there's basically two levels. Well, it's a 2x2. First you have input and output. We should forget about input. Right? Because if you structure basically goals, objectives well, and you give people the direction, resources that they need, then you just focus on output. That decreases the level of digital surveillance that you need, And therefore, the other kind of 2 levels of the 2x2 is basically going granular or broad. Now, the temptation is always to go granular because that's what you can quantify, but not everything that measures, not everything that counts can be measured, and not everything that measures counts. So I would say, in general, emphasizing output and high-level kind of metrics or data is advisable. That still creates one problem, which is the paradox that, the more complex your job, and probably the more educated you are, and the more you get paid, and the fancier your title, the more there is a disconnect between, the actual behaviors that you perform and those goals or outcomes. It's a really interesting paradox that, the more important you are, and the more senior you are, the harder it is to actually know whether you're adding any value to the organization or not. All the way to prime ministers and presidents and CEOs, when they say, during my tenure, we increased profits by 20%, because of you, despite of you, or was it a coincidence, So, so I think one final point, which is that it's the connection between input and output that we need to investigate and research. Not at a trivial level, like during the pandemic, people had their toddlers bashing on the keyboards so that the quantification of strokes makes them seem more productive. But actually, there's still a lot of stuff to be discovered if you mine everything and you identify what signals predict better outcomes going forward.
Yeah, I think there was a study, I think it was Citigroup. Don't quote me on that, though. One of the big banks tracked their people during the pandemic, thinking that they were going to see a massive decrease in work, and all of their people were spending longer in front of the computer. So I think, firstly, we have to put trust in people. Like, surveillance is not the answer. We have to put trust in them that they understand how to manage their working week, their jobs, their output, and their value. What you can do is give them tools. So Microsoft has something called Viva Insights. It's for me. I'm the only person that sees it every single week. But it tells me really interesting things, like this week you had no deep work time. There was absolutely no time during your entire 5 days of working where you had more than a 30-minute break in between meetings. And then I'm like at the end of the week feeling a bit burnt out and really frazzled when my to-do list is longer than it was at the beginning of the week. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that helps. It also finds gaps in my diary and gives me options to slightly rearrange how my week is set up to, if I need, 2 days where I've got 3 hours of uninterrupted work time, how can it help me do that? And I think we're gonna see a lot more of that. Microsoft Copilot, which has been with 20 private customers, has just been announced at being with 600 enterprise customers worldwide. I'm sure there are many in this room who are now about to embark on using it. Again, the idea there is if it drafts your email responses, if it goes through an annual report that you're looking at and pulls out the top 10 things that you need to know, it enables you to be productive. It enables you to find that time in your day when you're not like frantically trying to scan a 30-page document, and gives you a place where you can start from. And I think we have to understand that flexible and remote working benefits single parents, young parents, people who have a atypical, work or life environment in some ways. And we need to be really careful before we essentially disenfranchise those groups of people. We want to encourage these people to be able to turn up and be as valuable as they possibly can. And I think, Tomas talked about one of the reasons why there's so much backlash towards potential technologies is, around CEOship. I think another one is because we still do live in a world where men are making most of the decisions about what happens in a working environment, and actually what we're talking about in the room here disproportionately benefits women. And so we have to actively fight against the rhetorics that we're hearing and try and find a new model and try and find a new way through to help drive kind of that remote, flexible, hybrid work environment, because it actually advantages the people who have not traditionally been given a system where they can be successful. That's Lucy Cooper's opinion, that's not Microsoft's opinion, so please don't quote Microsoft on that. But there's a lot of information coming up around that, around how we need to support those more minority people in the workplace.
I think that's absolutely right, but just to say, also you need to bring people together in person regularly. You know, we've just done a piece of research on Gen Z, people being hired remotely. You know, the social cost of not bringing people together is huge, so being really conscious about that. But I absolutely agree with you about the flexibility around the edges, but we do need to do that.
Right, we've only got a minute left. So one more question at the back there.
Hi, thank you. Super interesting. I'm Nikki Lees from QB Insurance, and just really interested, building on some of your comments there, Lucy, and then Alex, probably more of a question to you about the 4-day week. We've got an environment where, since the pandemic, our people are a lot more autonomous in how they work. There's a lot more flexibility, juggling around family life and the like. Interested to know how that environment works with the 4-day week trials.
Why don't we talk we can talk more offline about this. However, very briefly, companies that already have successfully made a move to hybrid or flexible can add the 4-day week sort of onto that. Trying to do both is like trying to play 8-dimensional chess. So, however, and finally, there are a few companies that are introducing the 4-day week, partly as a way of sort of creating an incentive for people to come back together, but not back 5 days a week. So trying to construct a system or a schedule that allows for sort of, you know, a greater degree of flexibility, but also provides people sort of the chance to be co-present, right? To absorb tacit knowledge, to sort of read social signals, to do all of that kind of really cool stuff that helps us all be better people and do better work.
Brilliant. Right. Has anyone changed their mind? Which do you think can do more to improve productivity, psychology or technology? Right. Hands up for psychology.
Oh, decreased.
Keep your hands up, keep your hands up.
Tracy's got her hand up.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And technology.
13, I count.
13.
Oh,
1, 2, 3, 4.
I feel like team technology might be in the ascendant. Oh, it's some abstentions. It's not actually a binary, everybody. Yeah,
No.
Right, so we're going to knock off now. We're back here. If you liked it so much, do come again. And
We'll make it totally
we'll make
different.
it different. We'll have different anecdotes, and everyone can go off for coffee now, and I hope to see you later in the day. Thanks so much. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you.